Welcome back. All right, news of the day video for all you fine people for your Tuesday, April the 4th. So, for the Calgary Flames, tonight's a big night, and they're going to have Chris Tanev back for it. So Tanev will be back for the game against Chicago. Stone apparently a healthy scratch tonight. And Markstrom. Daryl Sutter basically saying that Markstrom's going to go tonight and may very well play tomorrow night as well. They play Winnipeg tomorrow after this game against Chicago tonight. These are important games. Markstrom gets paid very well, and so it makes sense to put him in the back-to-backs, even though Markstrom's numbers haven't been fantastic. Neither have Vladar's, and so you kind of give Markstrom the net. You cross your fingers. And Chicago, one thing that does favor this decision is usually with Chicago, they don't get very many shots. So the likelihood of Chicago getting, say, 22, 23 shots, maybe even less than that, pretty high. There have been plenty of games with Chicago, as I've watched lately, where they can go 10, 15 minutes without a shot. So Markstrom shouldn't be overly tired from tonight's game, unless, Chicago channels some kind of energy they haven't had lately. And so he should be okay for tomorrow night's game against Winnipeg. So it makes some sense there. And they're in a must-win situation. They absolutely cannot afford to lose. So we'll see what happens with Calgary tonight and whether or not they can get themselves tied with Winnipeg coming out of tonight. But yeah, they'll have Tanev back. That should help. So Sheldon Keefe won't confirm whether or not Murray has a concussion. They're saying it is a head injury. Keefe also throwing in and other stuff. So maybe some other nagging injuries with Murray as well. He's only listed as day-to-day, and they're really not giving any information. Now, in the event that Toronto's going into the Stanley Cup playoffs without Murray, we know Murray has playoff experience, but Samsonov was probably going to be the starting goaltender at the beginning of the playoffs anyways. Of course, for Toronto, they're against Tampa, and the bad news is that Vasilevsky is really getting his game together. So that could spell trouble for Toronto, absolutely. I do expect more people to be taking Tampa than Toronto in that series. We're only a couple of weeks away from being in the midst of that series, and of course, I'll be doing all the previews for those series. Plus, we'll be having polls on the channel for who people think are going to win. So we'll see how those polls turn out. But yeah, for Keefe to not confirm a concussion, to me, kind of does. Like, I kind of read between the lines. So Coach, I mean, he's not saying it's not one. So if it's, anyways, hopefully, in this case, hopefully Murray's not out that long, and it's supposed to be just day-to-day for him. Coach Sullivan is saying that he's encouraged that all of the injured players for the Penguins, and there are a few, are practicing, and that they're traveling with the team. They're in non-contact jerseys, so they're not like on the verge of returning. But Pittsburgh, a team that's dealt with a lot of injuries this year, a bunch of guys who were almost there, right? So that's good, and it's nice to see them progressing. Of course, for every team right now, you are 10 days out from the regular season being done. So there's very little time for these guys to get ready, come back into the lineup and play. So there may very well be some guys who come back over the next week who may not be 100% ready. But for teams like Pittsburgh, for a team like Florida, for a team like Calgary, there may not be an option. It might be a situation where these guys either come back and play now, or there won't be anything to come back to at all in a couple weeks' time. So we'll see which players come back and which ones don't. Quality starts. I want to talk about quality starts because Vezina Trophy voting, of course, hasn't even started yet. And yet, it's basically acknowledged that Ullmark's going to be the Vezina winner. I've even heard it said that, he's being referred to as that in Boston by Boston. I've heard it said. Ullmark, 87% of his starts have been of the quality variety, meaning a save percentage higher than 900. Gustafsson second on the list at 73.5%. Sorokin, 71.4%. That may be your three finalists right there. I went with a minimum of 25 starts in order to be on the list. And so maybe Gustafsson ends up in there. If he gets a couple more really good starts before the end of the year, maybe he ends up being one of the top three finalists. There will be votes, though, for Vasilevsky because he's Andrei Vasilevsky. So he's going to get his share of votes as well. But yeah, Sorokin and Ullmark have been seen as favorites, as well as Hellebuyck. Hellebuyck not as high on the quality starts list, but yeah, it's an interesting list, and again, it is very likely Ullmark's award to lose. Career points per game for defensemen. This has been getting talked about, and so I figure I might as well throw this into a video as well, because it is an interesting talking point. So Bobby Orr has the all-time record for points per game by a defenseman at 1.39. And again, I had to have a cutoff point. Paul Coffey, 1.09 points per game over his career. Cale Makar is currently sitting third on that list at 1.03, ahead of Denny Potvin's 0.99, Ray Borg's 0.98, McInnes' 0.90, Paul Reinhart's 0.86. I've already done a video on him. I think I've already put him in my THG Hall of Fame. Loved Reinhardt's game, and there's Quinn Hughes tied with him at 0.86. Brian Leetch, 0.85, and Erik Karlsson at 0.83. So his numbers gotten better this season with the way he's been playing. But it is interesting that Makar, Hughes, and Karlsson are all in the top 10 on that all-time list. And of course, numbers will tend to drop over their careers. So for guys like Potvin and Bork, they had some amazing seasons. So did Leetch. And then towards the end of their careers, those numbers end up dragging them below a point per game. Now, career points per game for all skaters. Gretzky, of course, number one. I don't think anybody ever approaches the 1.92 mark. Mario Lemieux, 1.88. So that's how close those two were. And I've talked about it before. I totally understand why people would pick Lemieux over Gretzky. For me, it was Gretzky was the best of all time. Mike Bossy at 1.5 even. And then there's Connor McDavid at 1.49. A number that's gotten better this year and may very well get higher in the next coming seasons. Of course, it does tend to drop as you get older as well. Bobby Orr, 1.39 points per game, as stated with defense here. Marcel Dion, 1.31. Peter Stastny at 1.27. Crosby, 1.26. So again, Crosby earlier in his career would have been in this side of the board. Now is on this side, but Crosby, one of many in the NHL's history who have come in scoring a ton, and then in the second half of their career, it's more about the team game and not as much about the scoring. The scoring's still very good with Crosby, but it's more of the team game. And then you got Forsberg at 1.25, Kent Nilsson at 1.24, and Phil Esposito 1.24. Kent Nilsson, a supremely talented player who didn't really go for the physical or the defensive side of it, and I've already done a career video on him as well. So I just wanted to put that on a board because I think it's interesting to look at and see where guys are, and we do appear to be in a new live puck era. It's not as much of a live puck era as it was in the 80s when we were getting 4 goals per game per team. There was one season where it was above 4 goals on average for every team. I don't think those days ever come back. But yeah, it is interesting to see Makar and Quinn Hughes and Erik Karlsson all in the top 10. And again, I do think Quinn Hughes on the league level, probably underrated right now as a defenseman. I think that changes based on whether or not he can keep doing what he's doing this year into, say, next season as well, especially if he does get named captain by the Vancouver Canucks. JT Miller. So I wanted to talk a little bit about JT Miller because I've started to see the discussions of whether or not he will get traded. And again, it comes up to he should go to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh makes a lot of sense. Now, with Pittsburgh, the one thing is this. So we have a Pittsburgh team that's on the cusp of maybe missing the playoffs, right? They're an older team. For JT Miller, the Canucks would be looking for futures, draft picks, prospects. While Pittsburgh might look like the ultimate location for JT Miller, and I get it, if this is a team that's trending outside of the playoffs, do they want to give up future assets for Miller, get that contract off the Canucks books? And keep in mind, he has a no movement clause that kicks in when the new contract kicks in. I would throw in this, though. While there are speculations on whether or not he might leave, Rick Tocchet, when being interviewed by the TNT crew, I believe it was TNT was on, loves JT Miller's game. Absolutely loves him as a two-way forward, and had nothing but glowing things to say about JT Miller. And I think he'll have some say in who stays and who goes in Vancouver. I still think it's going to be Besser. I still think Garland is going to be a guy who's on his way to town. And I think a buyout or two might be on the books as well. I don't think Miller goes. And I said that last year as well, and then he signed the extension in Vancouver. I still get the feeling Vancouver wants to stick with Miller. Plus, the way that he's played under Rick Tocchet kind of indicates that contract right now. And I understand people don't like that contract long term. I don't either, necessarily. But the reality is that you sign these contracts knowing that towards the end of the contract you might be looking for a way out, but it's about the right now. The Canucks looking to retool and get back into the playoffs next season. That's the plan. I'm not saying whether or not I agree with the plan because I've talked a lot about it before, but clearly this is the route the team's going down. They have to get creative this summer because the cap space, not really their friend in order for them to add players. And this is going to fuel JT Miller talk as well as trying to get that cap space, which is too bad because the contracts that are problematic on the team are those of Myers and OEL. I don't really qualify Miller's contract as so problematic, but when you add it to the other ones, that's where the issue comes up. So we'll see, right? But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.